Hi guys, so I'm back today with another video. Thank you so much for tuning in again. I really appreciate it. And in today's video, I'm gonna really just talk about my experiences or my observations of when women are single versus married in Nigeria, and how that differs from the US and the UK. So yeah, I just want to discuss that and get some of your opinions and thoughts about it. But before I get into this video, first of all, I would like all of you to please like this video and then subscribe down below so that you can get more content like this. Okay, so the reason why I thought about this topic is because I often talk to my sister about my experiences living in Nigeria. She lives in the US and she does not plan in the foreseeable future to move to Nigeria, but we actually have really funny conversations about my experience living here versus when I was living in the US, and she's always curious and asking me questions about that. So I thought I would talk, I guess, let you in on the insight that I let her in on today about my thoughts on being single in Nigeria versus being single in the US. So the first thing I actually observed is that it's really hard to date anonymously here. There's no real anonymity when people are dating here. So let's say you have met two people that you would like to get to know a little bit better. And there's nothing serious happening. You just met these two guys. You're trying to figure out, do I like this guy or do I like this guy? And maybe, you're tired of talking on the phone. You're tired of sending messages. FaceTime is getting old. And so you just want to go out and see what this person is like. It's really hard to do that here. It's really hard because Lagos is tiny, and a lot of my single friends complain about this all the time. It's just really hard to go out with one person, right, by yourself, more than 2 times without people linking you guys, without people saying you guys are a couple or you're dating in some sort of way. And it's kind of annoying if maybe you went on a date with a guy twice and you're like, nah, he's not for me. And once people see you, I guess, going out often with different guys or girls, you kind of get a name, or your gist starts to spread, or this person isn't a serious person, things like that, which is really annoying because all you're trying to do is get to know people. And so I think that's very different than being in the US. I think in the US or in the UK, it's a lot easier to serially date or be a serial dater if you so choose to be. Because your social circles are not as closely related. And this is especially the case if, let's say you go out on even if you're semi-sociable, once people start to know you, if not your name, then by face, it's just easier to fall into that trap, right? I think another thing that I've noticed that is different in Nigeria in terms of dating is that a lot of times when people move back, now this isn't all the time, but a lot of time, especially for women, you'll move back to Nigeria and you'll live with your relative or friend or family, and it's usually family member or family friend, right? And so the way you kind of maneuver dating is very different. No one really wants to see you coming home at 2 a.m. Oh, how was your date? Things like that. So it's almost you kind of, especially when you haven't introduced whoever you're dating to your family, there's this kind of tango or dance where you're kind of slyly going out on dates, or you stay late for work, or you're sleeping over at a girlfriend's house, or you're doing certain things, but it's almost you're kind of going back to high school if you dated in high school. I personally don't have this experience because I was not allowed to date in high school, and I just wasn't openly dating in high school. So it's a lot easier. Sorry. I lost my train of thought. Anyway, like moving back here kind of feels like you're in high school when you're going on dates, because like there's a certain time you're expected to be home, even though a lot of times it's not said. There are certain things that like you're expected to do, things like that. You're not gonna really like rush into introducing him to your family until you know that you're serious on a certain level of, I don't know, for me, I was like, I wasn't introducing him or bringing him around until I had serious visions of marriage in my future. So it has that kind of high school feel to it, depending on your family and their views on dating, like when you're single and you're living at home. I think another thing that I noticed here, and I've had several discussions with girlfriends about it, is like, and this is related to the last point, is that if you're living at home and the people that you live with are a bit strict, or you just don't like them, or you don't like necessarily where you're living. I've seen this happen a lot of times, is where girls will get married to escape living at home. And so sometimes they might not vet their partner the way that they should, because they're just tired. Like once you get to a certain age, there gets to be a point in time where you're tired of answering to someone. I don't want to answer to you. I don't want you asking me where I am. Even if you don't care, like, I just don't want to answer to you. And so a lot of times you'll see, I've seen girls who are just not, they don't want to live at home anymore, and they get married in order to escape that. But there's a danger with that, right? There's a danger if you don't know who you're marrying, if you're rushing into this relationship just so you can leave your house. I've definitely seen it blow up in people's faces, where they marry someone with no idea of who that person is, and then you're stuck in a marriage where that person could be worse than your parents were, maybe more overbearing, maybe like mean, abusive, a cheater, just different crazy things. And I've seen it work perfectly well, where you and the guy like were perfectly suited, it's gone great, he has no major demands, and you're living your home life and doing what you want. You're decorating your house how you want, you're cooking the way that you want, you're waking up when you want. So it's worked both ways, but I definitely have seen that happen because of living at home. Another difference that I've seen in dating and relationships here is, okay, well, it's not necessarily in dating and relationships, but being single here, as a single woman versus being a married woman, the way you're treated is kind of different. Now, depending on who you're around, can be very different. You can either be like that single girl, or you're iawo, you're his wife, you're married, the level of respect, the way people refer to you is very different. At work sometimes, like, even if you're married and you stay late at work, sometimes like more responsibility can be shucked on the person who's unmarried, because you have no responsibilities, quote unquote. Nothing is tying you down, as opposed to this married person who has an obligation to their spouse, who has an obligation to their children. And so there's a lot of bias in that. Even like in family dynamics, sometimes there's a level of treatment where, oh, this is just the single one, whereas, you know, we the married women will discuss this and do that. So there's a difference that I've seen in that. And not to say that in the US, women sometimes, like, once you get married, you're not treated a little bit differently, but it's just really a lot more pronounced here than I saw in the US. Another thing that I think that you see here a lot, or feel, this is more visceral than it is like visual, it's pressure. There's a lot more pressure here, especially once you start getting to your mid to late 20s as a woman. Now, men, they can go into depth and not be married. And they're like, I mean, there might be pressure, but the pressure is way less intense than if you are in your 20s or 30s getting married in Nigeria as a woman. And it comes from so many people, so many sources. It comes from your parents, it comes from your siblings, it comes from your friends, comes from your pastor, comes from your boss, comes from your doctor, comes from your nurse, comes from your plumber, comes from, like, it comes from so many different angles. Like, the amount of pressure, the amount of marriage or single ladies marriage advice conferences I've seen, prayer breakfasts, fasts, devotional studies, all of this stuff it's just really crazy, like the focus on not being single and getting married. And I think sometimes in Nigeria, like your shelf life as a married woman, or as a single woman, excuse me, is just thrust in your face a lot more than you would see it in the US. Not to say that there's not pressure in the US to get married, because there definitely is. But I feel like here, the pressure to be married is just crazy. And then being surrounded by weddings all the time and just seeing like people having these extravagant weddings, and you want your extravagant wedding, and there's just a lot of pressure, and you start to then put pressure on yourself. Another difference that I've seen is that there's a lot, like the attitude towards marriage is more accepting here in Nigeria, especially with men. Like when guys are dating here as opposed to in the US, but like the next logical step is marriage, if that makes any sense. So you're not really like you'll definitely get F-boys here. You'll get your Yoruba demons. You'll get those dudes who are just not serious and they're dragging you along. But I think men here, even if their intentions are poor, a lot of times like the focus of that dating is to, like, once they get to a certain age and they feel like their friends are getting married, and even when their friends aren't getting married, but they feel like they have come to a stage in their life where they want to be married, it's a bit like more, I don't know what the word is, but it's just more pervasive, like that marriage is the next step. And this is what's gonna happen. We're gonna get married. Or the discussions around marriage are a bit more straightforward and in your face than in the US, where sometimes I feel like you can be quite nebulous. Sometimes you look like you're scaring a dude away when you're talking about marriage, even when you're in a committed relationship. But I mean, it's gauged on the relationship. Now, I'm talking in general. This isn't in specifics, because you can be pushy anywhere in the world. You can be moving too fast and just doing the most, but I'm talking about generally. So those are like generally the major differences that I've seen. But, you know, I'd like to hear from you guys. I'd love to continue this discussion down below, because this is just my own view. And I love learning from you guys. If you have, like, what are your experiences being single in Nigeria? If you have any, versus being married, or, you know, like, do you agree with some of the things I've said? Do you have, like, do you disagree? Like, what are your thoughts about it? I'd really love to know. I'd really love for us to have a discussion and just have a community of learning from one another. So please comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts are. What are the differences that you've seen being single in the US versus being single here? Thank you though for watching. I really appreciate it, and stay tuned for the next video. Bye!